Good morning. I've been putting off doing this particular talk for a while. It's about Timothy in the New Testament, the next one in my series. And this is the one role that shouts out at you from the letters written by Paul to Timothy. But I just haven't wanted to talk about it. And I nearly abandoned it at the beginning of this week. I was thinking, well, maybe the church needs something different during this time of coronavirus, not more about Timothy. I'll let you into a bit of a secret. I've shared this maybe with one or two before, but not widely, I don't think. Nearly every year I invite leaders from our church to the Global Leadership Summit in October. It's brilliant leadership training from some of the best leaders in the world, both Christian and secular. And the last 2 years there's been about 10 of us at Crossgate for the 2-day event, and all on video. And each year, as we begin the first session, I start to feel profoundly uncomfortable. And I think, why did I invite all these leaders from church to this? Why? Not because the talk is rubbish, not at all. It's usually brilliant. But it's focusing on church leadership. And it's usually about stuff that focuses on the role of the senior pastor of a church. It's too close to home for comfort. So I imagine the others will be looking at me and thinking, yeah, we could do with a pastor like that, with those qualities. So I imagine they'll be thinking about my shortcomings. And I certainly am. I'm only too aware of them. And I feel like I'm being exposed. Now, they might not be thinking that at all. But often the follow-up discussions do focus on how the church is led. For which, although we have leadership teams, I have ultimate responsibility before God. But of course, that's the purpose of going on a course like this. It's to learn and to improve. And the talks are not about putting anyone down. They're always geared towards improving rather than wallowing in failure. Embracing failure even, and going again. And the same is true of Bible teaching. You know, we love so much that is encouraging in Scripture, and we underline those verses, especially at times like this, the really encouraging ones. And we'll hear some encouraging ones later in this talk. But you know, the Word of God is there to bring light into darkness, to challenge us, to bring about change in all of our lives, whether we are pastors or not. And I've said this many times, when I study God's Word to preach it, the first person to get challenged is me. Don't ever think that I'm trying to get at people when I'm preaching. I'm trying to be true to God's Word, which is no respecter of persons. It cuts us all down to size. So this morning I've stuck with the plan, and it's more about Timothy today. I've talked about Timothy as young and courageous, as a troubleshooter, as an administrator, and as a liberator of women. And last time, a few weeks ago, as a soldier. Now today, if you haven't guessed it yet, what's the role of Timothy that I want to consider that caused me to want to back off? It's Timothy, the pastor. Paul's 2 letters to Timothy are very obviously written to him as a pastor of a church, the church in Ephesus. And though these were personal letters, I'm sure that Timothy would have had them read out to his church. And maybe he felt a bit like me and many a pastor, imagining his congregation muttering, yeah, that's right, Paul, you tell him straight, that's what he needs to hear. You know, we know Timothy had a tendency to timidity, as well as being aware that he was relatively young. So I think it's quite possible he might have felt like that. Anyway, as I'm speaking today, I'm trusting you won't just be thinking about me or Anthony or Angie, Otherwise, it won't benefit you very much. And I know that in reality there's huge goodwill in the church, to me as pastor and to our leadership, and it's a joy to function in that encouragement. So as I talk, I'm not berating myself. And I've used the preparation as an opportunity to let God speak to me about the pastoral responsibilities for church, not to duck the issues. And having said that, I hope you will use it too, not as a stick to beat me or any other pastor for that matter up, but also to be a better pastor yourself. You? A better pastor? You're asking? Me? Yeah, here's the thing, because the truth is, just as we are all actually leaders, if you will, pastors, we all lead at least one person ourselves. So you have a responsibility to lead and pastor yourself. And so we all have at least one person to pastor. And many of us pastor others as well, families, groups, teams. One of the key principles of local church is that pastoral care is not the job of one person. It's not me or my wife, Anthony or Angie or Linda as pastoral coordinator. It's a shared responsibility. We're all responsible in any group, whether family or church or home group or team, to care for one another. And pastoring is a mutual responsibility. Do you know, and I want to say to church, how well you have been doing in these strange times of coronavirus. Many of you are in the WhatsApp group. Now, social media is far from perfect, don't we all know it? But it's better than nothing. In fact, in this situation, it has been, surprisingly to me, way better than nothing. I've been so impressed with our church. There's been so much encouragement shared on WhatsApp, our church group. There's been teaching from Scripture there. There's generosity of spirit. There's been honesty, and there's been frustration, real humanity. There's been words of wisdom and experience. There's been practical help offered and delivered. There's been great songs to listen to. There's been humour. There's been some good jokes. There's been some terrible jokes. But for me, the best was Derek as Superman singing Happy Birthday outside Kenzie's home. That was classic. I loved that. You know, I can't keep up with all the texts on WhatsApp. Sometimes I'll come, there's been 60 since I last looked, but that doesn't matter. I'll skim through them. It's a communication. It's you people pastoring one another. And sometimes I've thought when I've read a text, I'm the pastor, I need to say something to that. And then somebody else puts something way better than I ever would. It's brilliant. So caring for one another is a shared responsibility. Not the responsibility of one pastor or even one pastoral team. And you people are doing that in all kinds of ways, not just on WhatsApp. Way beyond that, I know. Things that I don't know. So be encouraged this morning. Well done. Now, I could stop there, couldn't I, and leave us all feeling good. But I want to delve into this a little bit more, if you'll allow me the time. Now, you've got the benefit this morning. You can switch me off if you want. Nobody will know. But I hope you'll want to listen to a bit more. In the past, I've heard people from our church and other churches that ask the question, who is caring for me? Now, sometimes we are in a situation, we're alone, we're desperate. We need to ask that kind of question. We need to seek help. And we encourage that in our church. Seek prayer. Never be afraid to ask for help. Never be afraid to pour your heart out to God. And nothing I will say next is denying that need, the validity of those cries for help. So I hope it doesn't sound heartless to say that the question, who is caring for me, is not the most helpful one. and it's rather self-centered. You see, it puts the onus on someone else to look after me, when a better question might be, who can I care for? So we turn that question round and we start to look out and care for others. And then we also find that we are being cared for ourselves. You see, as with so many things, when we focus on others, that the initiatives that we take then lead us to the answer to our initial question. At the very least, our own focus on our own concerns and worries starts to diminish when we look to others to help them. As I was thinking about all of this, my mind jumped to some words of Jesus about birds. Everyone's talking about the birds, aren't they? People are asking, are the birds singing a bit more loudly at the moment? Or is it just that we are hearing them better? Because so much noise, the real noise of traffic, the internal noise of busyness, it's no longer distracting us. You know, I love the way God speaks to me when I'm preparing. So as I was reflecting on the birds, and I came across a text on my phone and a lovely video from Sarah Jackson, and she sent it a week ago and I'd missed it. See, God's timing is perfect. He saved it up for me just for that moment. So I hope you've watched it. I posted the link for earlier. And if not, please do. The birds are deafening. You know, we might not see any of them, but they're singing from the rooftops and singing from the trees in Sarah's beautiful garden. And at the end she quotes those words of Jesus. Let me just read them to you now. From Matthew chapter 6 and verses 25 to 27, where Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life?" Those are great words, aren't they? So, if you're ever tempted to ask that question in worry and self-pity, who's caring for me? Just think of the birds and remember what Jesus said. But I'm jumping ahead of myself because so far I have assumed an understanding of the word pastor as someone who cares for other people. Online you can read loads of articles about what a pastor is. I've read books about pastors. The difference between a pastor and a priest, the functions in a church, biblical qualifications, etc. I only glanced at one or two, to be honest, this time. But I was actually quite confused when I looked online to check the definition of a pastor. The first definition for a pastor said, a Christian leader. Fine, okay. The next definition said, a rose-coloured starling. Back to the birds, a starling with a pink beak, found in Eastern Europe and fond of locusts. There you go, a pastor. So perhaps I ought to start chirping and flapping my wings a bit. The actual meaning of the word pastor is a shepherd. I guess most of you knew that. To pastor others is about being a shepherd. Now, perhaps that means something to us. Shepherds care for a flock of sheep. They watch them. Remember the shepherds who, the first people on earth to see baby Jesus? They were described as watching their flocks. You know, we sing, while shepherds watched their flocks by night. I wonder if you've ever thought much about that. Being a pastor is a watching brief. And then Jesus gave us the story of the shepherd who goes hunting for that missing sheep. One had slipped away. And the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes to rescue that one because he cares for it so much. Shepherds care. They look out for the number one, the one who's missing. They protect the flock from attack. Shepherds provide for the flock, making sure there's water and grass. And the Psalms give us this picture. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. And so we have beautiful pictures of a shepherd. And these are our expectations then of a pastor. Fair enough. It's a looking after role. It's quite wide ranging, as we shall see. It's much more than a hug and some kind words, though those are very important. You know, and at this time we do have the kind words at the moment, but we are sorely missing the hugs. Do you know, even when we start meeting again, there may be restrictions, social distancing might continue. I hope it won't be too long before the hugs return. Some of you might not be too bothered about that, but the current distancing risks doing great damage over the longer term if we feel unable to have close contact with one another again. It's an important part of being human. So it's especially a danger for our children. The loss of touch, close relationships, physical with others. One of our grandsons, Ethan, did something beautiful last week. He sent us a real hug. Here it is. It's Ethan's size. He drew around himself and he sent it to us. He sent us a hug. So Ruth and I have been having hugs from Ethan during the last week. Isn't that great? There we go. There we go. But let's turn to Timothy and see what we can glean from what Paul wrote to him. More about being a pastor. So let's look at some other specific tasks of pastors. Now first, with regard to women, letting the women learn. I taught a lot about that. In the letters we've already read about Paul's instructions to Timothy about women, and I've talked about how terribly misunderstood these words have been because of our failure, and the church's failure, to understand the culture and the context of the day and the original meaning of the words used. And Timothy was being encouraged to let the women in church learn and grow in faith, and many became leaders. You can listen to that talk online if you want. Secondly, prayer for the nation. I talked about that early in this series from 1 Timothy 2, the responsibility of a pastor to make sure the church prays for its leaders, the nation's leaders. And Boris and our government always need our prayers, and never more so than now. But on that subject, thirdly, of leadership, more specifically in our church leadership, there's a long list of qualifications of church leaders in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 1 to 7. Let me just read those now. 1 Timothy 3, 1 to 7, where we read, "Here is a trustworthy saying. If anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. Now the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to much wine, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well, and see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders, so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap." So this is all about the selection of elders. And Paul is reminding Timothy of these essential characteristics of a leader. Not just that he would live up to them himself, but because of his responsibility to select good leaders of the church. It's a key pastoral responsibility to choose good leaders so people know how to conduct themselves. Because Paul says the church of the living God is the pillar and foundation of the truth. It goes on to say in 1 Timothy 3 verses 14 to 16, Although I hope to come to you soon, I am writing you these instructions so that if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Beyond all question, the mystery of godliness is great, and it continues. And the church, so often criticised, and often rightly so, tragically divided, so imperfect, we know that. It's the pillar and foundation of the truth, Paul says. Paul goes on to talk about a great mystery. Well, that certainly is. How can this flawed organisation, the church, be given such responsibility? Why did God do it? Because God is not a great dictator in the sky. God has always been a relational God. From Adam and Eve, throughout Scripture, while we recognise the sovereignty of God, we also see He wants relationship with His people. He chose to create humans to partner with Him, to relate to Him. He gave them responsibility then, to this day, and into the future. And He has chosen the church to be the pillar and foundation of the truth. Wow, that's us. So Timothy has a responsibility to provide leadership and select leaders who will ensure that the church in Ephesus was all that it could and all that it was meant to be. And that was a big responsibility for him. And that's true too for us here in New Day Church who are currently leaders, as we've led the way in bringing in our new pastors, Anthony and Angie. And we're thinking about others for leadership as elders and also on the board. So we'd encourage you, please pray with us about that. The next area of pastoral ministry is teaching. And Paul goes on with warnings against false teachers. Chapter 4, chapter 6. In fact, it's a recurring theme starting in chapter 1. You know, people often talk about the early church, don't they, and how wonderful it was. And in Acts chapter 2 at the beginning, it was wonderful. But the early church in much of the New Testament was terribly flawed, with all kinds of problems. There's no getting away from it. The scriptures don't hide it away. We read about the Corinthians who were greedy and impatient and selfish. The Galatians who were reverting to being like legalistic Pharisees. The Romans who were divided between Jewish and Gentile believers. And this Ephesian church led by Timothy, which was in great danger from false teaching. And all that's before we even get to the 7 churches in Revelation and their issues. So Paul encourages Timothy in his role in teaching. This is where I feel more comfortable. My previous job was as a teacher of children, and my key role in church is a teacher. And so I put a lot of time into preparation of talks, and I consider this particular role of a pastor of great importance. Teach the truth. Teach it well. So there are repeated instructions by Paul about teaching. Let me just read some of that to you from 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 10, where he's talking about putting our hope in the living God who's the Saviour of all men and especially of those who believe. Command and teach these things. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to preaching and to teaching. Teach it accurately. And this is just as vital for you who are parents or grandparents, with caring responsibility, pastoral. Teach your children well. Reminds me of a song from the 70s of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. That shows me age, doesn't it? Teach your children well. And fourthly, in these pastoral roles, caring for the elderly, the widows and slaves. And there's a whole section on this in 1 Timothy 5, which begins like this. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. And there's more there. There's more about caring for the widows and the elderly in particular. And we seek to do that. And the fifth thing that Paul talks about here is about using your particular gift. And so in 1 Timothy 4, verse 14, Paul said to Timothy, "Do not neglect your gift, which was given you through a prophetic message when the body of elders laid their hands on you. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers." And so in the middle of all the other responsibilities thrown up by church life, and things I've been talking about, pastors should focus on their particular gift. The same is true of all of us, as we just try and connect with this thing about being a pastor to our own lives and those around us. It's worth making a point here. Comparisons are very unhelpful. Do you know, I constantly used to compare myself, I still occasionally do, with my predecessor Rob. When I became senior pastor, and Rob is a brilliant teacher, and I'm a teacher, but I could never live up to that great legacy left by Rob in our church. I couldn't even live up to my own expectations. And I remember one day, many years ago now, there were a couple who were unhappy with church, and they met with Ruth and me, and they were comparing me with Rob. And suddenly, in the middle of this, I interrupted, and I declared, "I am not Rob Whittaker. I am Graham Hooke." Do you know what? It was a therapeutic moment. It helped me move on and be myself. You see, it's no good trying to be someone else. You're you, I'm me. That's how God likes it. We're all unique. We should all be the very best of who God made us. You be the very best of who you are. And you know, this is important, as Anthony and Angie have joined us as pastors. And Ruth and I are loving getting to know them. Even in the middle of this lockdown, we're doing some long FaceTimes with them, a couple of hours the other night, and spending time praying with them and talking about all kinds of things. And they're starting things, taking the initiative and doing great in this first month they've been with us, even though most of you haven't been able to see them. They really are. They're not clones of us. The board didn't want clones of us. God forbid. Do you know, I knew the church needed someone different to move forward. And they're different. And that's great. You'll find out soon enough. Celebrate it. Let's make the most of their difference and allow them to be everything God made them to be. And that will be hugely beneficial to our church. It's time to finish. So in summary, Timothy was a pastor. Paul gave him a wealth of instruction in his 2 letters about how to be a good pastor. But his words are relevant to all of us, because we all have some pastoral responsibility for ourselves and for others. A pastor is a shepherd, and we've looked at some aspects of what that meant in practice in the Ephesian church and what it means for us today. But to finish, it's worth celebrating the shepherd who is absolutely the very best at being a shepherd. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." Psalm 23 says, "The Lord, he is my shepherd." The best pastor ever. So that's something to appreciate for ourselves, that we have a pastor who is the best ever in Jesus. But it's something also to aspire to in us seeking to pastor ourselves and pastor others. Look to Jesus. Look at the model he gave us, the example he gave us. So as we finish, I'd like us to listen to the words of Psalm 23. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. This is Psalm 23 that I've been asked to read. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
There are some songs now which express something of what Graham has been sharing. The first couple being related to the 23rd Psalm and about God's shepherd pastoral heart. There's a lovely version of the hymn, The King of Love, and also The Lord's My Shepherd, the one that we sing with the chorus, I Will Trust in You Alone. I've also included a song called I Choose to Worship, another one by Rent Collective. Not that I'm biased in any way by their Irish roots, of course. But it's worth listening to this as the words are really good and they're so applicable to where we are right now. God bless you as we worship now, and may he bless and keep you as you go through the coming week. Remember, he is in control and he is with us.